Look, this is like the simplest corruption case. As I said, there's one part of it where uh, uh, somebody who is associated with, I think, an airline staffer or something says, "By the way, delete all these text messages that you're getting from me." And he
And
writes
he
back,
says,
"I
of
always
course.
do,
Yeah.
always do." And obviously they get that because you can't actually delete text messages if it's an unencrypted source. So yeah, I mean, I think the bloom was off the rose of Eric Adams for quite a long time. If you talk to anybody who lives in New York City,
Yeah.
but this, uh, it's a it's minor in the grand scheme of things, but we are talking about $10 million in the legally siphoned campaign funds.
Exactly.
Um, it's just New York City has had such a bad run in terms of public officials, and there was this
Yes.
thought that the change in the way campaigns are structured so that there's a instant runoff voting system might make it easier to get a consensus candidate who wouldn't fall into some of these traps. But obviously, that wasn't the case.
Yeah. I mean,
Any thoughts
I
on this?
think
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious, and everyone has been sharing the kind of worst, most mind-bogglingly funny and ridiculously corrupt parts on X and everywhere else. But yeah, I think when you do actually get down to the funds that were taken and put that into the context of what's been happening in New York City recently, I mean, we just saw the horrible shooting on the subway over a
Yeah.
290 fare, right? So, when you
Right.
put everything into context, then it kind of stops being as funny. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Do we know what is going to happen with Eric Adams? Do you think he would step
Well,
down, or is he going to ride it out?
people are certainly calling for that. Today, Jerry Nadler joined the chorus. AOC
Mm,
has called for him to step down. He seems like a pretty belligerent guy, so I think he's interested in continuing on. He held a press conference yesterday outdoors so that everyone in New
yeah,
York
that
could
was,
heckle him.
and
Smart
they
move.
did.
But yeah, I don't think he's interested in resigning. Now, if he did resign, the public advocate, Jermaine Williams, would actually become the mayor. And
Mm,
that might spur him to get into the mayoral race. Now,
mhm.
there are already three or four different candidates in that race, and it looks like Andrew Cuomo is going to run. So, just when you thought corruption was eradicated from New York City, here comes Andrew Cuomo. So, that's obviously going to be a big story. Next year is when that race comes off, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're one race ahead of where we need to be. We are less than 40 days out from this
Yeah.
election. And I know you've been focused on some other things just in the near term, Emma. But
Mhm.
is there anything regarding the election that you're seeing that you want to just sort of bring up here for discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to echo something you already brought up, the donation campaign is very important, and I will be one of the reporters traveling. I'm taking on the role of Midwestern correspondent given Chicago. So I will be, hopefully, the goal is to be in Wisconsin for a little bit in the beginning of October, where
Mm-hmm.
I'll be looking into some local races, but of course also the state of presidential campaigning in the
Mm-hmm.
state, in some rural areas, as well as kind of in, Madison and other bigger
Yeah.
cities in Wisconsin. So that's something I'm really excited for. The Midwest is, obviously I have just a wealth of fascinating states and places around me from Chicago. So that's something I'll be taking advantage of as a reporter. But yeah, I mean, I think election wise, especially in the past like day, um, I've been reading the new policy book that Harris just put out, the economic opportunity, like little brief that she put out in kind of preparation for this and hopefully for writing some pieces on it, and have been looking specifically at kind of what she's saying about these Midwestern areas, trying to see if I can use some of that to contextualize my trip. So there's a lot about manufacturing, factory towns. I think she has this new line about Trump being like the biggest loser on manufacturing, which is in this policy
Hmm.
materials. And then I know she's also saying it in speeches. And lots of takeaways from this. But I think one that I'm really looking at right now is kind of the Midwestern manufacturing towns angle.
Well, let's get into that.
Yeah,
You know, buttressed by last night, where Harris put out a very strong statement in advance of a Trump trip to Michigan, where she, talked about how his trade policies are allowing companies like Stellantis to move down to Mexico, saying that she opposed the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement, which she did, but really kind of for environmental reasons. She's kind of shading and saying that she opposed it because it wasn't strong enough on manufacturing. But backing up the UAW strike threat against Stellantis for not following through on some commitments it made when it inked a new labor agreement. Really, kind of a strong message there. And the issue I have is that message is very much memorialized in these policy books and
yeah,
statements. But when she actually gives a speech, it's much more hedged, it's much more guarded, it's much more along the lines of you're not going to get to call me a Marxist. I'm a capitalist.
yeah,
I support our large businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to trot out as the avatar of the campaign people like Mark Cuban.
yeah,
So, it's a bit muddled when you actually are sort of interfacing it through the message. But if you dig down into these kind of policy books and things like that, it actually becomes a lot more clear that she
mhm,
is interested in providing incentives for companies to stay in the United States, providing incentives, particularly for advanced manufacturing,
yeah.
as she terms it, winning the jobs of the future. And there's some interesting stuff sort of dialed in there. But the problem is, to me, that you have to dig to find it, and
Mhm.
in outwardly, it's kind of a different presentation.
Yeah, I also think it's worth mentioning, or at least kind of just noticing that when I was reading this, China comes up like once a page at least, almost once a paragraph in certain sections of this, where she's specifically talking about like this advanced manufacturing and rebuilding
Mhm.
industry. And, um, this is a very complicated story to get into, but she is talking about, Trump ceding the production of the cars of the future to China. And all kind of in the back of this is Trump's
Mhm.
proposed tariffs on China, which come up earlier in this document when she's talking about kind of just everyday inflation and cost of living for families. So I don't know. I am still kind of working out actually how I feel about the leaning into the competitiveness with China here. I think that's something I'm personally trying to just think how I want my politicians to be speaking about. But um, yeah, it's very clear here. If you had any confusion left at this point about who, like, the party thinks the main competitor of the world will be, it's China, and it specifically seems like a lot of this insecurity about national security with semiconductors is where she wants to shift the labor conversation. So
Sure.
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, complicated for
Yeah.
me because I think it accelerates some international relations issues.
Right. I mean, and that's sort of a balance that I think progressives have been thinking about for a while.
Hmm.
I think there's no question that the impact of uh, allowing permanent normal trade relations with China, allowing China's entry into the World Trade Organization has created a shock, particularly industrial towns and factory towns in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio, that was debilitating to these industrial areas. I think what the Biden administration has done, both in terms of what was done in the Inflation Reduction Act, incentivizing manufacturing on things like batteries, things like electric vehicles, things like clean energy, and also giving bonus tax credits for what are called energy communities or industrial communities. It really has had the intended effect of bringing some manufacturing back to areas that really were abandoned in many ways. And the numbers don't lie. We've seen a boost in industrial manufacturing construction, because it takes time, right, to actually build a factory to certain specifications and before you actually get the production out. But if we look at the construction numbers, they're at the highest in American history, at least in recorded American history, right now, in terms of investment. And a lot of that investment is private. The tax credits brought this money off the sidelines. And so the Biden policy is really working in this respect. However, we've had 4 years of right-wing forces demeaning Biden's policies mainly because of inflation, and Harris seemingly unwilling publicly to sort of directly associate herself with the administration in which she works, wanting to draw contrasts and talking about this new way forward as a sort of distancing effect from Biden, even though if you drill down into the actual particulars of what she's doing in that policy book and other fact sheets, there's very little distance. This is a continuation of this policy. So, that creates kind of a disconnect in terms of how she's talking about it versus what it looks like she'll actually do. I think it becomes somewhat awkward in that sense. But I think she's on firmest ground when she says the kinds of things that she said in this statement last night. And let me just call up the statement, because it was really unusually strong, and it was put in Harris's name. I mean, a lot of times you get these press releases and they're from a press secretary or they're from a rapid response guy or something like that. This was actually put in Harris's name. It starts out with the line that you mentioned. Donald Trump was one of the biggest losers on manufacturing in U.S. history. He makes empty promise after empty promise to American workers, but never delivers. As president, he cut taxes for corporations, encouraged outsourcing, and lost nearly 200,000 manufacturing jobs, including auto jobs. He has joked about firing workers, supported state anti-union laws, and suggested companies move jobs out of Michigan. All of that is generally the case. I mean, the manufacturing job count is largely because of COVID. I mean, she's counting the last year. If you go beyond that last year, there is a gain in manufacturing over the 2017, 18, and 19 period. However, certainly his tax law encouraged outsourcing. It gave a lower tax rate to companies overseas than it did here. There were many instances of outsourcing. There was a famous moment that you may or may not remember. It was 8 years ago, so maybe you're in high school or something. But there was a carrier plant. There was a carrier plant in Indianapolis, and there was video taken of the meeting where the employees at Carrier were told that their jobs were going to be moving to Mexico. And it was a really intense video. And Trump picked up on that immediately and said, Carrier shouldn't be moving their people to Mexico. Bernie Sanders at the time also brought this up, but Trump said they were very strong on this. And there was a deal struck to keep some jobs in Indianapolis, and Trump took that as a win, right? And never talked about it again. And what happened
Yeah.
after that is that not only did all the carrier jobs go over to Mexico, or the vast majority of them, but a factory down the street, literally down the street from this carrier plant in Indianapolis called Rexnord, also went to Mexico. So, the empty promises, the laziness, the making a comment and not following up on it, that's all a feature of sort of Trump's history in terms of manufacturing. And this week, he made a different idle threat, saying that if John Deere moves its some of its factory jobs to Mexico, as has been suggested by the company, that he would slap a 200% tariff on John Deere products coming in from Mexico. The problem with that is that he signed a free trade agreement with Mexico. So you're actually not allowed to put a 200% tariff on Mexico. So this is an empty threat.
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, you have Trump making these very, empty threats. I think she is rightly, Harris is rightly calling him out in this statement. On the other hand, you have Harris, where if you dig in under the surface, you see that actually what she would do in a John Deere situation is try to incentivize the company to stay here. But on the surface, you have people like Mark Cuban going on television and saying, "Well, you can't put a 200% tariff on John Deere, because then their Chinese companies will be able to more easily compete, and then this great American company will be destroyed." This great American company, which is shipping all its jobs to Mexico, right? I think there's a real problem with the public messaging versus the behind the surface messaging.
But do you think that if she did emphasize in her public messaging some of these policies that we're obviously reading here about tax incentives and just like really boosting that, would that appeal to people in these swing states where she needs to appeal to people? Because I know some people who live in swing states
Sure.
who have friends who think she is just super radical. Like they believe the kind of
Right.
silliness of like radical Marxist. She's coming for all our money and blah blah blah. And so I guess I can kind of see why the messaging is different than what we're reading here. So do you think that?
I think that's a very good point. And the way I think about it is this. You know, we heard this about Barack Obama as well 8 years ago. The kind of, he's a socialist, he's a Marxist, he's a communist. And the reason why that kind of bounced off him is because he spent 2 years campaigning in the public eye, and there was a long amount of time to build up trust. That people saw him, they heard him, and this caricature was just not believable, because he had been out there. He's on your television every day, and it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with the person that you're seeing. Kamala Harris was 2 months ago was. I mean, it's weird to say that a vice president was plucked out of obscurity, but look, she was not front and center, particularly on these economic issues. They would send her out to do rallies around Dobbs and abortion, right? They would put her in particular positions, but it wasn't the economic position really. So 2 months she's on the scene, and she's starting to do more interviews, but she hasn't done very many. She's done, these short rallies, which is a stump speech, and people haven't gotten that familiarity. And so she, maybe rightly, because she's seeing it in her own polling, feels the need to overcompensate for that, right? And so in the messaging, it's all about, don't worry about me. I'm not who you're being told I am. I'm a very sober person. I'm not
Yeah.
going to ruin your your household, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a function. Uh, After the switch, a lot of people were saying, well, this is great. We have this energy and it's a fresh candidate and we're getting this burst of attention. And why don't we get rid of the 2 year campaign? Why do we have a permanent campaign?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, part of me agrees with that. But one of the virtues of the permanent campaign is that when you have to go through that gauntlet, you build up a lot of trust with the American people, and she doesn't have that.
Mm.
Just because of the calendar, like that's why she doesn't have it, right? And so she's overcompensating for it, and it's muddling a message that I think does play. And you can like this message could be as much about uh, you know calling out Trump for essentially lying to people about his record as it is about telling people what they believe.
So it looks like we have a question.
Okay, yeah, what do
Um,
we got?
I'll read it. So this is from John, and John asks, "What about AOC's housing plan? Will Harris possibly pick up on this substantive policy possibility?" And
Well,
I will just say
housing.
off the bat, I can tell you about Harris's housing plan. I don't know much about AOC's.
Well, I will. I mean, we can do both.
Yeah,
Housing has become a really big part of this campaign, right? And
which very happy about that.
yeah, we're actually in our next issue, which will come out just after the election. We're going to do a whole symposium on housing with a variety of different approaches, including AOC. So, what Harris is focused on is building and supply, and promising 3 million units and accelerating building, which I think is useful. She's also talking about a $25,000 first time home buyers tax credit, which I think is a
Hmm.
little less than useful. We've actually done that in America, and I don't think it's gone very well. It just
Hmm.
pulls things forward, pulls purchases forward rather than creating any kind of new help for people. And it also, if you incentivize it on the demand side, then what do builders do in response? They just raise the price by $25,000 because
Mm.
you have it available to you. Um, uh, so, I mean, I think there are other parts of the Harris plan I might be forgetting, but that's most of it, right? Um,
Yep.
AOC put out this bill last week. Now, look, I mean, when you put out bills, who knows what actually happens? But I think what's interesting is she's attacking the financing part of this.
Mm.
So
Okay.
she would create a fund for the construction of housing, a public fund to publicly
Okay.
fund housing. Now, I mean, what we've seen where you go across these business cycles is there's a lot of housing construction when it's a good economy, and
Hmm.
then the economy tanks, uh,
Hmm.
like in the Great Recession, and housing building just went off the cliff. And I think there's a inordinate focus on zoning rules and those kinds of difficulties in housing, and less about the fact that housing is cyclical. It goes at the same rate as the business cycle. And if it was counter cyclical, where there is money available to build housing no matter whether it's good times or bad, then you could continue a steady rate of building in even in depressed economy uh,
Mm.
structure. So that's kind of the big thing about what AOC's plan would do, and I think it's generally pretty good. I don't think that it's something that Harris has mentioned. The
Mm.
other thing that AOC's bill does, and she's been actually on this for a while, is there's a thing called the Faircloth Amendment.
Hmm.
Faircloth was a senator from North Carolina from many years ago, a Republican, and he made it illegal to build new public housing.
Mm.
So any new under the Faircloth Amendment, any new public housing has to be accompanied by the destruction of old public housing. as many units as fall off, that's what can be built, uh, which is ridiculous, right? I mean, all that
Horrible.
all that does is just have everybody sort of running in place. And so AOC has been trying to repeal this Faircloth Amendment for quite a while. A lot of times you hear the yes in my backyard people, the YIMBY, say it's illegal to build housing. This is terrible. Why is it illegal to build housing because of zoning laws? It's illegal to build housing in when the housing happens to be public because of
Mm,
this policy in the federal government. And so there should be as much exertion of making that level of housing illegal as we have with regard to zoning stuff. So
yeah.
that's a short answer to that question.
Another element of the Harris housing policy is I think the low income, here, let's see, low income housing tax credit. So that kind of like putting a
Yeah,
tax credit on the builder's side for
yeah. It's a
rental
tax credit.
housing.
Yes, it's for giving the builders a tax credit, right?
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
they would build more, right? Yeah.
Which to me rings more promising than the sort of like down payment tax credits on the uh, buyers, like individual
Right.
families side. And then there's also neighborhood homes tax credit. So that's, I guess, for oh yeah, okay, new construction or rehabilitation of over 400,000 owner occupied homes in lower income communities. So
Mhm.
I'm not 100% clear on the okay, it goes to states. It's state allocated and then
Right,
goes to
right.
specific
I mean,
projects.
all of
Yeah.
this is just trying to build additional funds. Um, States and cities have difficulty financing affordable housing projects or
Mhm.
helping developers finance affordable housing projects. One of the reasons is that we have higher interest rates right now. We're in a high
Mm.
interest rate environment now. The Federal Reserve just reduced interest rates by half a point. That's going to help. But certainly, what they were doing in the last 2 years was increasing the cost of building housing at a time when we had these shortages. This is kind of what I was talking about with regard to the AOC bill.
Yeah.
So, you know, uh, interest rates are rising because there's this desire to cool off inflation, cool off the economy. And what that does functionally is make it harder to buy homes because mortgage rates go up, and it makes it harder to build homes because financing for mortgages or for homes goes up. And so if you had a public fund, you could at least tackle some of the building problem by having readily available funding to
Mm.
continue with that building of housing. So that's generally the idea there.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I do want to mention again because we've mentioned it a couple times before, but we're trying to put it beginning, middle, and end. Prospect.org/donate. That is where you can go to help us with our travel fund for the election. I can tell you that I will be on Monday in a swing district in the Palm Springs area. Will Rollins is running for a second time against Ken Calvert, who is actually the longest serving California congressman in America or in California, even longer than Nancy Pelosi. Ken Calvert has been serving, and he was redistricted into a swing seat after being in a safe Republican seat for many, many, many years. That includes Palm Springs, which Palm Springs has the only all LGBT city council in America. It's a very much a
Whoa.
strong gay community. And all of a sudden, Ken Calvert is really supportive of LGBT rights after being an architect of Prop 8, which was the
Huh.
same-sex marriage ban in California. So it's an interesting seat. It was close last time. The first time under this new district, it was a 4-point race. And Will Rollins ran then, and he just lost, and he's trying again. And so I'm going to be
Mm.
talking to him on Monday. I am going to Montana, where
Mm.
John Tester is trying to salvage his seat, 3-term senator. Um, Basically, the most important seat in America, if you think about it, because It's the difference between Democrats holding the Senate and not, although they're starting to put some money into Florida, putting some money into Texas.
Mm,
And there's another race that actually you wrote about, so maybe we should talk about that
yeah.
in Nebraska. So, because of this Montana seat, basically, Democrats have 51 seats in the Senate right now. Joe Manchin is retiring in West Virginia. They're going to lose that seat. That's done. So then you top out at 50. And Montana is one of the seats they're defending. And this is a state that has gone very red in recent years. Tester barely held on in 2018, and he's in a lot of trouble right now. And I'm going to go up there to see really what's going on with that race in a
Mm-hmm.
couple of weeks. So then you look, okay, well, where can they pick up a seat, right? Because they're defending all these other seats too in Ohio
Yep.
and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. Uh, you know, Even if they hold all those seats, they're at 49 if Tester loses with Montana.
Mm-hmm.
So where can they pick up a seat? And one of the places I mentioned Texas and Florida, but those are always kind of on the edge, is Nebraska. And tell us about Nebraska. Quick question from Jules about Sherrod Brown. I think that race is very close, the Ohio race. I think Tester's probably in more trouble than Sherrod Brown right now, but that race is very close. Bernie Moreno, who's Sherrod Brown's opponent, came out and called suburban women single issue voters for being interested in abortion, which is probably a bad idea. Abortion wasn't really even mentioned as a major issue in Ohio before that, even though just a year ago, Ohio enshrines the protections for abortion into its state constitution. So that seemed like a dumb move. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
point is that Ohio, even if Ohio, if Sherrod Brown pulls it off, if without Tester, they'd be stuck at 49,
Mm-hmm.
unless
Unless,
there's this long shot win in Nebraska. And tell us about the Nebraska Senate race.
yes. So the Nebraska Senate race is fascinating for a couple of reasons. One of which is that this would not actually just be a straight up win for
Right,
Democrats because the candidate, Dan Osborne, is an independent and
right.
he hasn't said officially kind of what party he would caucus with, but when you look at his issues, you can see that a lot of them are the same priorities that are being run by Democrats right now. So he talks about legalization of marijuana and choice, reproductive, his way of framing
Mm-hmm.
abortion rights and um, labor, things like that. But so really
And who's
fascinating
Dan
race.
Osborne? Who is he?
Yeah, a really like salt of the earth Nebraska union man. So he led in 2021, I think it was, a really
Mm-hmm.
successful Kellogg's strike of Kellogg's in Nebraska.
Right.
And it basically guaranteed that the factory was going to remain open through at least 2026 and protected a lot of jobs. So that kind of got him his bona fides in organizing
Mm-hmm.
and leadership. Um, and now he's running against their Republican incumbent for Senate and has been doing just really like shockingly well. There's
Yeah,
new
I mean,
polling all the time that sees them basically tied, or maybe he even has a tiny bump, but it's all within the margin. So
and
yeah.
something's going on because the Republican Senatorial Committee, National Republican
Mm,
Senatorial Committee, just started spending in Nebraska.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
I mean, the interesting thing about this is because he's not running as a Democrat. Now, the
Yeah.
Nebraska Democratic Party is also not running a candidate. So he really is the
Yeah.
alternative
Yep.
to Deb Fischer, who is the incumbent Republican. But
Mm-hmm.
because he's not running as a Democrat, the Democratic campaign committee in the Senate is not going to give him money because
Yeah.
he's not running as a Democrat. So it's a little one sided, and the fact that the Republicans are spending here, it shows that like this is
Yep.
real. They know that there's a chance here
Yeah.
for this guy, and they're going to have to spend, which helps
To
other
keep the
races.
seat.
Yeah, they're going to have to spend to keep the seat, which means, if money is finite, it means that's money that's not going in Montana. That's money that's
Mm-hmm.
not going to help Ted Cruz in Texas. We have a question from
Mm-hmm.
Jared about calling all red. That race is tight, but I feel like Texas has been a heartbreaker for a long
Yeah.
time. And, Beto O'Rourke came close to beating Ted Cruz and couldn't do it. It's still, you're still about a 5 point spread in Texas, and just generally between Republicans and Democrats. And I know Ted Cruz is not the greatest campaigner, but it's just tough to get over that hump in a big state where, yeah, the Democrats came out this week and they did say they're putting money in Texas and Florida, but those are huge states. I mean, even putting money in, it doesn't move the needle that much unless it's really well targeted, because there's just so much. It's hard. It's hard to move the needle with a lot of money in a big state like Texas. You need millions and millions of dollars, and they don't have that. I mean, because they're defending these races all over the country. So that's why Nebraska is interesting, because you don't need a lot of money, right? It's a small
Hmm.
state,
Yep.
and uh, the presidential races are they're playing there because there's Nebraska apportions its congressional districts one electoral vote each, and Nebraska 2, which looks pretty strong for Democrats, would give an extra electoral vote, which is actually really, really important, because there are a lot of scenarios where it would be a tie unless
Hmm.
Democrats win that one blue dot in Nebraska. So you have Harris Walz actually spending a lot of money in Nebraska,
Mm.
and Trump really isn't. They haven't spent money in Nebraska, so you have that help to at least to a Democratic message. If it's not, obviously Osborne's an independent, but at least it's a
Yep.
Democratic message. And you have the district race there, which is a swing seat race in Omaha. That's pretty much that entire district is Omaha, Nebraska, and that looks pretty good for the Democrat as well. Um, so there are factors here that push toward, yeah, this guy might actually have a shot, and I think he's a much better campaigner than some of the other independents. There was a race a few years ago in Kansas where there was an independent that was looking good in the polls, and then
Mm.
the Republicans came in with a bunch of money and they beat him by 10 points. I think the difference here is Osborne is a pretty compelling campaigner. There was
He
an
is,
ad that came out.
absolutely.
I don't know if
Mm.
you saw this ad, but there was an ad that came out just a few days ago, which, there's an old joke that politicians should be like NASCAR drivers. They should have the patches of all the companies that sponsor them on their suits. So he did that. He like kind of did that for Deb Fisher.
Mm. Yep.
And he put, all these companies that are for, it's a really great ad. I urge you to
Yeah.
take a look for it. Um,
That's a
and
big thing for him, is not accepting corporate money and then positioning Deb Fisher, who is, I think, like the biggest recipient of Union Pacific Railway money, actually. Positioning her as a foil, obviously. So he's super interesting. Take a look, read the article.
Yep, fantastic. And it's part of a kind of a movement, because the article
Yeah,
is more broad. So what you
it
wrote
is.
about was
Yeah.
it's part of a movement of candidates in these red states,
Yeah.
in heavily Republican states, who are trying something a little bit different in
Mhm.
order to get elected either as Democrats or as independents. And just tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's I looked at Osborne, obviously, and then I also looked at Senate races in Missouri and in North Dakota. And what you can kind of see in all three of these campaigns is leaning into that character. And I hesitate to say character because I think it is real for a lot of these people, especially Osborne, being someone who was born and raised on a farm, does manufacturing work, is part of a union, owns a gun, all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so the
Mm-hmm.
campaigns are actually really leaning into the the discourse that comes along with that, the imagery of that, the kind of ways of speaking and holding yourself and dressing and talking to constituents that comes along with all of that. And it's economic populism is kind of the biggest message that all of these campaigns are citing as their most effective campaigning technique. They're really trying to avoid some of the culture war issues that they all sort of identify as being most relevant on the coasts and in very already liberal and blue
Right.
communities. So it is really a red state playbook for people who don't want to keep talking about maybe LGBTQ issues and want to talk about their
Right.
jobs. So it's super fascinating. I mean, I think Osborne of the three candidates that I was profiling has the best chance.
Hmm.
But something I've also been thinking about is actually how this way of campaigning and how that kind of like discourse is seeping into national politics as well, right? We just had Harris multiple times in a row. Kind of, she went on Oprah and she's like, "Yeah, I'm a gun owner. If you come into my home, you're getting shot."
Right. Right.
Something to that effect, right? And so
Yeah.
then, some doubling down about guns with her and Walls both being gun owners has been coming up lately. So it strikes me as kind of from the same world of like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna
I mean, the
stop
gun thing feels a
being.
little cringe to me,
It does, yeah.
but, but,
But it's interesting that it's happening,
but
right?
it goes
It
back to
speaks
kind
to
of what,
something.
and it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, actually,
Hmm.
about the Harris manufacturing agenda.
Yeah,
And this is an attempt, we've seen this huge gender gap in the electorate
yeah.
where women are supporting Harris and Democrats at a much higher degree. And Democrats are trying to figure out, well, how do we handle this
The
situation
men.
of men, younger men who are drifting right? And one of the ways to do that is to speak to these pocketbook issues,
Yeah.
even like centrist kind of pollsters and outlets say, yeah, this isn't about crypto. This isn't about, this is about, men want economic opportunity, and they want to know that Social Security is going to be there for the next generation, all of that stuff. And you know this is why I think it's weird that Harris has spent so much time, reassuring people she's not a Marxist, rather
Yeah.
than just displaying it by the issues that she presents. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I think these kind of blue collar issues are one way to do that, where it would be aligned with a Dan Osborne or with a Lucas Kuntz or whoever.
Yeah.
And you saw it play out a little bit in that statement that I read before,
Yeah.
that was about manufacturing and about Michigan in particular. You're going to go up. You're going to be in a district in Wisconsin where a woman named Rebecca Cook is running. It's a sort of swingy House seat
Mhm.
against a real MAGA Republican guy, this guy Derek Van Orden, and she's running on the abundance of ag monopolies
Yeah.
in that district. It's a very rural district, a lot of dairy farms, and it's hard to compete with the big co-ops and the big input
Which
manufacturers.
also is an issue that came up a lot in the policy book that we were speaking about. She devotes a
Absolutely.
good amount of time to these kind of ag monopolies without saying the word monopoly, but it's everything around
Right.
it.
It's about
And
protecting competition or promoting competition.
exactly,
Like, what are you doing? Yeah,
exactly.
that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's interesting is that this is Rebecca Cook, what we're talking about with her.
Hmm.
She is someone who was endorsed by the Blue Dogs, which are the centrist
Hmm.
faction within the House Democrats. And yet she is promoting this anti-monopolist message. We see
Yeah.
that in other districts all over the country. Uh, and it kind of runs across the ideological spectrum, whether it's
Hmm.
progressives like AOC hosting Lena Khan in her district and that going
Yeah.
on 60 Minutes last week, or someone in a rural district in Wisconsin talking about ag monopolies. It's a
Yeah.
unifying kind of message. And I mean, in that economic speech, you didn't hear a lot about. I think Harris had one line about competition, but if you go into her policy book, there are like 6 or 7 things that are drawn directly from things the Federal Trade Commission, the
Yeah.
Antitrust Division of the Justice Department are doing. So you know, there's this weird dichotomy going on in
Yeah.
the top line race. But if you look to the frontliners, the people who are trying to win districts, this is the issue they're talking about. They're talking about price gouging. They're talking about price fixing. They're talking
Yeah.
about unfair competition. They're talking about corporate power,
Yeah.
and it's a really it's I certainly remember 5, 6, 8, 10 years ago, you didn't hear that from a lot of parts of the Democratic
No,
population.
absolutely not. And I think, yeah, it's really good that it has people are realizing that it is actually unifying and cross aisle and is actually just about people's ability to get by where no matter where they live in the country. So I'm
Yeah.
personally very happy about this shift that we've been seeing.
Well, we got about 5 minutes or so left. Maybe we could preview a little bit something that you're writing for us. I should mention we're rolling out this week. We started rolling out our October issue. A lot of it's about the election, about Trump versus Harris on the key issues. Um, but we are going to be doing a second issue. So everybody who's a subscriber, you're going to get 2 issues this month. And that's thanks to some partners that we've been working with. And this issue is about the states. So we focus a lot on national policy. We've done it a lot today, talking about Harris, talking about Trump. Um, but this is about the states, and the states have uh, diverged in policy to a
Mm.
massive degree over the last 30 years, where there was kind of an interregnum period where the states weren't shifting that quite this much. But now we have 40 out of the 50 states have governing trifectas, meaning that the legislature and the governor are of the same party. And so they're slowly growing apart. We have these two
Mm.
Americas. And red America is not content with just having the policy dominance in their own area. They are growing far more hostile and aggressively trying to impose their will and their governing preferences on the rest of the country. And we're looking at a bunch of areas where that's happening. And the one area, Emma, that you looked at for this issue is in the issue of abortion. So maybe talk about that briefly. Don't give everything
Yep.
away,
No,
but
I won't. I
talk
won't.
about it briefly. What did you uncover?
Yeah. So, yes, I'm not giving too much away, but when I think about the kind of divide and incursion between states and across state borders, abortion is the first issue that comes up for me and probably is for a lot of people. Um,
Yeah.
so what I narrowed in on was um, I stuck with the Midwest, so I'm looking at the story of 2 cities in Illinois and how they
Mm-hmm.
responded when some very red, right-wing extremist policymakers and advocates and activists who um, really got a lot of their initial work done in Texas. What happened when they tried to kind of bring these extremist policies into Illinois?
Mm.
And yeah, so trying not to spoil too much, but it is basically a story that gets at interstate travel for abortion and how that has been attempted. Different states are attempting to criminalize it, and then blue states are attempting to kind of counteract that by enacting things like shield laws that protect abortion providers within their
Right.
borders, no matter who they're caring for, creating kind of coalitions and alliances of blue states to support each other, um, abortion funds that go across state. So
Right.
I'm digging into that story about travel, the story about, you know, networks kind of resisting this incursion of right-wing policy, and sort of what do we do if this keeps happening, which it very well might without a
Yeah.
national solution.
Really interesting. Yeah. I mean, I have read, and we have the part of this in the issue about these. They call them abortion trafficking laws, right?
Mm,
Which say
yeah,
that okay, we're this little county in Texas, but if you
yeah,
use any of our roads to go from one place to another that is in the service of obtaining an abortion, then that's illegal, and we're going to police that. Now, how you police that
yep,
without setting up a checkpoint on your road 24/7, I don't really know. But they've empowered individuals to act
yep.
as sort of bounty hunters, to sue people who are assisting the procedure of an abortion, even if that abortion is not taking place in their home state. So Texas has a law like this. Idaho
Yep.
has a law like this, and you can expect other states to pick it up as well.
And
And
just
that's where this gets really, really nasty here.
to give a brief example of how that sort of surveillance and criminalization is being done in Texas, there's at least one story of a abusive husband who tried to file suit against the friends of his wife who were attempting to help her cross state lines for an abortion. So it doesn't just have to be
Mm,
road surveillance; it can be,
right.
facilitating abusive and violent home situations. So yeah, very scary stuff.
Definitely. All right. Well, that's enough of a preview there, but I urge you to keep your inbox open, keep your mailbox open. Check that out.
Yep.
We have a final question. What's your take on the VP debate? Yes, next week,
Yep.
next Tuesday, actually, Tim Walz and JD Vance are going
I'm so
to
excited.
debate. You're excited for this? Tell me,
Yeah, I'm
what are your
locked
thoughts?
in. Well, I heard that Pete Buttigieg was playing JD Vance in the debate
Yes.
prep, which is incredible to me. He's, I think that's such a great, yeah, a great choice.
Okay.
And we haven't seen, I at least haven't seen JD Vance on a huge national stage like this, especially not since scandal after embarrassment have come out with him. So I'm excited to hopefully see him embarrass himself some more, which I think he will.
Well, certainly he's been on the defensive ever since he was picked. And
Yeah.
I think personally, there's almost no question that the most effective communicator in this presidential race is Tim Walz.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, you know, and it's not even really close. If you
Mhm.
look at how he communicates in various ways
Yeah.
on the stump, it's pretty remarkable. And so I'm interested to see how that translates from a canned kind of speech environment to
Yeah.
a debate where you have to
Yeah.
think on your feet. But and I think JD Vance, he does get out there, talk to reporters all the time. He's in the back and forth. He goes on, CNN. He goes on, partisan media that isn't just conservative media. So I think it's going to actually be far more interesting, I think, maybe than what the presidential debate was. So we'll be
Yeah.
watching that. We'll be covering that. Emma, from the Netherlands. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Indeed.
And we will be back as always, 12:30 Eastern on Fridays. We'll put this up at the site so you can check it out at prospect.org. And please, prospect.org/donate if you want to give to our travel fund so we can get around the country and cover these really, really important races in the home stretch. We only got about a little more than 5 weeks to go. So
Woo.
thank you very much. Have a very nice rest of your day and nice weekend. And we'll see you again later.
Thanks, everyone.